Hi, today let's talk about emerging adulthood, and this corresponds with chapters 17 and 19 in your textbook. So to begin with, let's look at some hallmarks of growth, strength, and health in the early adult years. The years from age 18 to 25 can be considered the prime of life in terms of physiological development. Whatever difficulties young adults experience in their physical development is not usually a result of aging. The full height is usually achieved in girls by age 16 and in boys by age 18. Muscle growth and fat accumulation continue until the early 20s. In both sexes, physical strength increases during the 20s and then it gradually decreases. Most visits to the doctor are necessitated not by disease, but by injuries and pregnancy. So let's look at three terms that are important during early adulthood. These three terms are senescence, homeostasis, and organ reserve. Senescence is age-related physical decline, and this begins as soon as full growth is reached. What this really means is that sometime by the age of 30, after we have achieved our peak physical strength, we actually begin to get old. Homeostasis is the adjustment of the body's systems to keep the physiological functions in a state of balance or equilibrium. Homeostasis is most efficient during emerging adulthood, and one of the reasons is due to organ reserve. So organ reserve is the extra capacity that each organ has for responding to unusually stressful events or prolonged effort. For example, most of my students are in their early 20s and I'm in my late 40s. So if we were to go hiking Long's Peak together, for example, which is, as I understand, a fairly strenuous hike, the next day, most of my students would be able to get out of bed and go to work or go to school just about as normal. On the other hand, I would probably have a really hard time getting out of bed the next day, simply because at my age, my body lacks both muscle reserve and organ reserve, and this is just a natural consequence of aging. So that wraps up the physical hallmarks that I wanted to talk about of early adulthood. So now, let's talk about sex. When Alfred Kinsey conducted his pioneering interviews about sex during the 1940s and 50s, and again when Masters and Johnson conducted their laboratory research in the 60s, they were bitterly attacked from all sides. However, during the past 30 or so years, attitudes towards sex and research into sex have changed, and now there's a third attempt to fully illuminate America's sexual behaviors and attitudes. So Sex in America was a massive research project conducted most recently in 2005 by the University of Chicago's National Opinion Research Center. This study was based on the responses of a random sample of 3,432 Americans to 210 pages of questions pertaining to sexual practices, sexual attitudes, problems, and politics. Among the many findings reported in the survey was that earlier research studies were indeed quite flawed, and you may have heard of the Height Report, for example. Earlier studies were full of myths. A second research finding was that the amount of sex that was forced on women in this country is at an alarmingly high level. So let's look at some more of the specific findings of this study. Fidelity is more common than many people believe. Over 71% of Americans had only one sexual partner during the past year. 53% had only one partner during the past 5 years. 15% of married women and 24% of married men report having had an affair. The median number of sexual partners since age 18 reported by men was 6. By women was 2. The average American has sexual intercourse between 6 and 7 times a month. Married and cohabitating couples have the most sex. Approximately 40% of married couples and 56% of cohabitating couples have intercourse twice a week or more. Only 25% of singles who live alone have sex that often. Married and cohabitating couples report greater enjoyment of their sex lives than singles who live alone. Approximately 54% of men and 19% of women report thinking about sex every day or several times a day. A full 22% of women report having been forced to perform a sexual act. Of these, 96% knew their aggressor. The widely held belief that opposites attract is false. Married couples reported many similar traits. 93% were of the same race as their spouse. 75% were within 5 years of one another. 82% had similar educational backgrounds, and 72% were of the same religion. Again, this comes from a study completed in 2005 called Sex in America. Now, let's talk about love. Robert Sternberg presents 3 different components of love. These components are number 1, passion, number 2, intimacy, and number 3, commitment. The presence and the degree of these 3 components results in 7 different forms or types of love. First of all, let's look at these 3 components. Passion. Passion is the intense physical, emotional, and cognitive attraction that we have when we first fall in love with someone. Some psychologists have likened passion to a form of temporary insanity because it really is an altered body and hormonal state, and it does not last very long. Passion fades over time, and with familiarity, and hopefully with this time, intimacy builds in the relationship. So intimacy is about knowing someone well, accepting the other person, being comfortable revealing more of oneself to that person. This is a reciprocal caring and openness and acceptance and a communication on an emotional and a physical level. Over time, as a couple's intimacy increases and as they grow together, they may make a commitment to remain together. So commitment is the conscious decision to make ongoing decisions together, to share possessions, to accept and to forgive one another. So commitment is an integral component to remaining in a close, romantic relationship over time. Remaining intimate romantically takes dedication, and it also takes work. And those around us, such as extended family, can offer us help in sustaining a long-term, committed relationship. Research has shown that when families are more isolated and when they lack social support, they are more likely to break up. So now let's look at 5 of the 7 forms of love that Sternberg proposed that result from different combinations of these 3 components. The first love we're going to look at is called infatuated love. And this is just pure passion. Here, romantic relationships start out as infatuated love. But infatuated love can develop into intimacy over time. But without intimacy or commitment and just with passion, infatuated love always suddenly disappears at some point. And we can see this in many of the short-lived celebrity romances, for example. Romantic love is next. Romantic love is made up of strong passion and strong intimacy, but it lacks commitment. Unless commitment is added to this equation, romantic love will not be sustained long term. The third is called empty love. And here we have a very strong commitment, but no intimacy and no passion for one another. Sometimes romantic love can deteriorate into empty love over time as couples grow apart and as they stop working on their relationship. Often empty love leads to divorce, or it can look like married couples living together in separate ends of the same house. The next is called Companionate Love, and this includes strong intimacy and strong commitment, but there is no passion. There may have been passion at one point in time during the relationship, but passion and sexual desire is no longer a part of companionate love. So this type of love is often found in marriages in which the sexual passion has gone out of the relationship, but there is still a deep emotional intimacy and a deep commitment to remain together. The last type of love I want to talk about is what Sternberg calls consummate love. And this is the most complete form of love. This represents the ideal relationship that most of us really want in our lives. Couples who have consummate love have strong passion, strong intimacy, and of course, strong commitment. Such couples continue to have great sex for 15 years or more into the relationship, for example. They cannot imagine themselves happy over the long term with anyone else. They overcome their few difficulties gracefully together, and they each delight in the relationship with one another. Sternberg cautions that maintaining consummate love may be even harder than achieving it. Sternberg stresses the importance of translating these components of love into action. Sternberg warns, without expression, even the greatest of loves can die. And I think that what Sternberg means by without expression is lots of gratitude and acceptance and appreciation for one's partner. So thus, consummate love has the potential to turn into a companionate love after a long time, and it may be really hard to maintain over the long term. But again, Sternberg does suggest that it is possible. So that concludes this mini lecture for chapters 17 and 19.